Hello, everyone. Hello, especially to Rebecca, and to a certain candid SCP. Well, it has been a long time coming, and I apologize for that. And apparently my eyes are going berserk. But that's okay. Now, I will admit, I probably only have the energy for a single chapter. But while I've not read ahead, I'm certain it'll be amazing. Let us begin. I beg pardon, Rebecca. I have neglected to remember the name Selix. How doth I pronounce this? Thank you very kindly. Chapter 3. Selix. Kneeling at the large Shinto shrine, Selix meditated on the events of the day. At long last, the end was in sight. The enemy would never harm anyone again. No more loved ones would fall to Dunshi. The sun set behind him, allowing the now silent battlefield to slip into darkness. Long ago, he had been told enemy faces eventually blend together, but immediately after a battle, he would remember them. Most of the combatants in those battles had been adept warriors, skilled in the art of war. But then, some were old men. Others looked like boys barely old enough to know how to hold a weapon. These were the ones for whom his heart always ached. He had taken from them the very spark of life that had been paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears of loving parents. Hello, Super Wario. Sorry, just really fast, I will take a moment. Reacting to comments will be limited until I reach the end of the chapter. I apologize. This time it was worse. Much worse. Celix had been forced to cut through his closest comrades to end Dunshee. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves behind him, and he felt the presence of a woman kneeling next to him. Celix knew she wasn't really there, having been murdered by a brass dagger-wielding assassin a year after the war started. Knowing that, the illusion was no less welcome. She didn't speak at first, just knelt beside him in respect for the men and women laying in the field behind them, and the palace before them. Her eyes fell to the sword in front of Celix. It saved your life today. Her soft tone so soothing, always knowing just what to say. Have enough died, Awana? Am I done paying for my weakness? His eyes were closed, but he knew she was referring to the red-stained katana in front of them. She lightly touched his cheek with her hand, and his entire frame relaxed. You chose to spare a life. Is this not what you swore to do? His eyes opened and examined the katana on the ground. The turquoise ribbon lay in reverence, secured to the hilt. Celix had placed the weapon on the ground as a token of respect for the shrine. I spared one life. In return, I lost you, Bartholomew, Tintin, Lady Catherine, and was forced to take how many hundreds more? Celix's head turned and his eyes locked with those of the beautiful woman next to him. For what do you fight? The woman's eyes were filled with sorrow at his suffering. Her hair wisped in the wind. He could almost smell her perfume. I fight to end the monster I created all those years ago. His words were quiet, almost a whisper, but only because he knew the next question she would ask. Is it still worth it? Her hand caressed his cheek, and he could almost feel her touch. I can't do this without you, Awana. Celix brought his hand up to hers, but she began to fade away. Then, stop. The form in front of him was almost completely gone. There was a slight rustling behind Celix, but he couldn't take his eyes off the dissipating spirit. A sharp pain erupted in his abdomen, and Celix jerked forward. Looking down, he saw a shiny red blade protruding from his middle. The reflection in the blade was not his own, but that of a younger, bald man, without the tribal tattoo. The shock of seeing his own reflection in a braid sticking through him was enough to force Gerard's eyes open with a jerk. Jared, my apologies. He sat up, feeling his chest and abdomen. It took a few seconds to separate Celix from Jared in his mind. Labeling it a nightmare provided slight easing to the confusion. No sword. The sound of heavy breathing filled the room, and it took Jared several seconds before he regained enough of his senses to realize the breathing was his. The vision of a blade sticking out of his stomach was still fresh. A large knot grew in his stomach. A moment later, Jared leaned over, retching into the small trash can beside his bed. It was too dark in the room for him to see the bucket, for which he was grateful, feeling too weak to move away from the edge of the bed. The stale air didn't stir, keeping the bucket from spreading its aroma. A gust of warm air enveloped the room. Jared was too tired to care about it. As he lay there, the events of the dream took over, and the images in his mind began to adhere themselves to his mind as memories. First, the image of a battlefield gained force as he began to remember being there. This caused a great deal of confusion, because he had never taken part in a battle. But since waking up, he did recall being known as Celix, marrying this woman named Awana, losing her in a raid, and he had indeed fought that battle. The dream was an old memory, seeping to the surface. But if that wasn't enough, Jared recalled the pain as the blade united with his own form. Wait a second, Jared thought to himself. I never gave Celix that background. Slowly he convinced himself it was due to an overactive imagination, and he was able to go back to sleep. Before passing out, Jared could feel a much better temperature in the room, but he didn't realize the space heater was gone. When Jared woke, the sun was just barely peeking over the mountains in the distance. He sat up and looked around. The room was almost completely bare. All Jared's belongings appeared to be missing. Even the clothes he had shed the previous night had disappeared. What the crap? He leapt from the bed. Where are my clothes? He checked his closet. Empty. His dresser. Nothing. Even the bucket of sick was missing. Jared looked under his bed in hopes his footlocker was still under the bed. Sweet. Freeing it from under his bed, Jared had some difficulty getting it open, but the contents were soon in full view. Inside the old militia tote, his training equipment was untouched. The wooden training katana known as a bokken, his dark brown kendo gi, and hakama, the leather Toby boots, and the cloth sports wrap for his head. At least I have something to wear. Looking down at his undergarments, Jared realized that he didn't have much of a choice on clothing at this point. Maybe Ty will lend me some of his clothes, he thought. Or lend me some clothes, he thought. Try to find where he put his phone the night before. But as he searched the apartment, his phone was nowhere to be found. Or his car keys. Even the emerald ring was missing from its nightstand. This tears it. Jared let out a gruff noise in irritation, donning the martial arts clothing. His intention was to march straight to the apartment manager and complain about the apparent break-in. Grabbing the last item in the footlocker, a backpack he had made out of brown denim-like fabric, he placed a few things inside it. Securing the bokken to his sash and headed for the door, or secured the bokken to his stash and headed for the door. Expecting to be cold and snowy outside, Jared held his breath and opened the door. Instead of a cold blast, it was a semi-warm, muggy breeze that rushed by him. Standing in his doorway, Jared couldn't believe what he saw. Not a flake of snow covered the ground. Instead, the grass was a lush green. This was not normal. Idaho doesn't do green grass in the winter on its own, and it certainly wasn't muggy. Jared slowly crossed the threshold, with hands raised to hip, level. Okay, apparently I slept through winter. Fine. The office was across the courtyard from his building. Jared walked down the outside steps. A moment or two passed before he heard two strangely high voices around the corner. He would have rushed around the corner, but their tone and subject made him pause, listening. His hand found the handle of the boken at his side. "I'm telling you, boss, this is a huge haul! Ha ha!" "Shut up, you idiot!" A noise followed that comment. Jared figured it was a fist punching the first speaker, because a loud "Ow!" was the next thing he heard. Jared peeked around the corner and saw two very short men carrying a basket. They were about 10 yards from him and coming closer. The thought that they were the reason for the missing items in his apartment crossed Jared's mind. He took a step back, and a sharp object poked him from behind, just below the rib cage. "What do we have here? A monk, maybe?" a boy's squeaky voice asked. Jared turned to see another 30-inch tall humanoid behind him. This one was holding what looked like a thick arrow, with a cut point at its tip. "Hey guys, I found a new friend!" the small person shouted to his buddies around the corner. Jared heard the others drop the basket, and they rounded the corner a couple seconds later. The shorter of the two, one with dusty blonde hair and a dagger strapped to his side, spoke first. "If you're here to loot this place, you've made a mistake, monk." He tried to be intimidating, but it was hard for Jared not to laugh at him. He was only about 2 feet tall. The taller and obviously older of the two slapped his companion upside the head. "Show some respect, you fool," he said, and then bowed to Jared, with his hands out front, palms down, left covering his right. The emerald ring was on his right hand, ring finger, which Jared didn't notice. "My sincere apologies, monk, but you must understand. We were transported here during the night, and you are the first human we've seen." His voice reminded Jared of those door-to-door snake oil salesmen. "Would you be so kind as to tell us where you came from, and where we are?" Jared stepped away from the one holding the small spear. "This is Rexburg. I live in the unit just up there." He pointed up to the second-level apartment on his right. The 3 short men looked up, and the leader put his hands behind his back swiftly, removing the gold and emerald ring and pocketing it. "Yes, well, we are merely lost Athlians, looking for someone to tell us what's going on." Jared turned to them. "You mean there's no one else here?" He looked toward the parking lot, but all the vehicles, including his own, were gone. "Well, that's just great." Well, that's great." He spat out the words under his breath. "No, indeed. Not a Terran in sight. Though there are 2 armies just down the hill ready to rip each other apart." Jared's hackles stood on end. There wasn't time to worry about these tiny Athlian thieves. He was worried more about his friends at the bottom of the hill. "Where down the hill, exactly?" Jared asked, the tension in his voice growing. Being in the southeast corner of the college campus and near a small intersection of the hill's crest, the Cranes had a 50-50 chance of being fine. The older Athlian gave a nonchalant shrug and looked off into the distance, where his head cocked to one side. "Oh, let me think. Where did we see them? Come on, little man, do you know or not?" The Athlian rubbed the back of his neck. "I may know where." for a price. Jared's patience was gone. He felt as though a shadow shrouded his heart for a split second. He grabbed the Athlian by the tunic and lifted him up so that the little man's eyes were level with his own. "Where?" Jared roared in the little man's face, not realizing the wind whirling around him for the duration of the word. His light gray eyes flashed bright amber in that moment. Only the Athlian in the air saw it. A faint odor filled the air behind him, accompanied by a dark area on his pants. His two subordinates froze in place as the wind rushed around them. All right, the dangling Athlian shrieked. "At the very bottom of the hill where the two large stone roads cross. Please put me down." Jared set the little man on the ground and tied the bottoms of his hakama closed, so that he could move freely without catching it on things. The Athlian moved to retreat, but tripped, falling back onto his butt. He scrambled up and sprinted across around the west side of the building, toward the road as Jared looked off to the north. A few columns of smoke were rising in the area at the very bottom of the hill to the north. Oh, God. Please, no. The words left his mouth involuntarily, and his stomach tightened. He had to save his friends. Well, this is exciting. It's getting good. Not that it wasn't good to begin with, but alas, sadly, I will have to take the moment to pause here for the time, and we'll pick up Chapter 4, Dorzak, next time. Again, thank you to both everyone in the chat, Rebecca, and M. Kingsley. Remember, everyone, if you find my pacing a little slow, and let's be honest, it has been a while, please consider picking up a copy of Drawing of the Soul. I am not paid or sponsored to say this. I'm merely saying it's a good book, from what I've read so far, and I like to see creators supported. Thank you all, and have a good evening.